All right. Thank you all for joining me today. My name is Jed Edge. I'm the chair of the Department of IT and also a lecturer. And I want to talk to you a little bit about data privacy and kind of what it is, how different companies are kind of tracking you in ways you might not be aware of, and kind of what you can do about that in order to kind of secure your privacy more online. So we live really in what would be considered a digital economy right now. And in some cases, even been called a surveillance economy because a lot of the data that is generated online is being monetized by different companies. And all of those likes and interactions, even with like social media posts, where you're going on the internet, what products you're looking at, all of that information is being gathered by these companies and being monetized in certain ways. And so just out of curiosity, what do you think Meta, that's the parent company for Facebook, what do you think that that company's revenue was for 2025?
2.9 billion.
Okay, that's a lot. Okay, that is a lot. It's going to be higher than that, though.
So I was thinking
Any guesses from the folks online? Anybody want to guess how much their revenue was?
Nothing so far.
Nothing so far. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and give you the answer here. Over $200 billion. Okay. What is Facebook? I mean, when you think about it, Facebook we consider a social media company. Okay, and I'm going to pick on Facebook a little bit because that's one of the companies that I know a lot about based off of my research, but this really applies to really any of social media companies out there and just companies in general. So over $200 billion in 2025 was reported, and that product's free. So think about that for a moment. Where is all of that money coming from just for a company like Facebook? So all of that money, or the vast majority of that money that they're getting in revenue, is from taking your data, because they have over 1 billion users on the Facebook platform, and monetizing that data and selling it to advertisers or selling ads to its users, selling information about you. What are your likes? What are your political affiliations? What are things that you find interesting? What are products that you like? Because you have Facebook Marketplace now, where you can go on to Facebook and find things to buy and sell. So all of that information, your demographics, who are your friends? What are your connections like? What does that network look like? Do you have any kids? Okay, those are products that they can sell to somebody if you've got a kid of a certain age. All of that information can be monetized and then sold. Okay, and so that's where the bulk of that information or that revenue is coming from, is from them being able to monetize that information and having that many users on their platform, because then they can go to companies and say, hey, if you want access to our companies or our customer base, essentially, then you're going to pay us money. Okay, so I talked a little bit about this, but let's think about it a little bit more in more detail. So how is my data being collected? Okay, so there's probably 4 primary ways that data is being collected about you. One way is going to be direct collection. Okay, so that's, you go to Facebook and you sign up for an account. Okay, you go to a website to receive a discount and subscribe to that or create an account with that particular company. So they're getting information typically, your name, sometimes your address, phone number, email. Sometimes they might ask for age information so they know what types of products that they can market to you. But that's typically the type of information that's going to get collected for direct collection. Clicks and likes, when you're interacting on Facebook or other social media accounts, those are direct collections. Now we're going to move into the types of data that's collected in a less visual way. So these are going to be cookies and web tracking technologies. Okay, so you can think about cookies. That is going to be like a text file that is generated and stored within your browser as you move about different websites, and it's going to store information about you. And a lot of times, your cookies and the web tracking technology, usually in the form of like invisible pixels, tracking pixels, those are kind of used in combination. So you've got a invisible pixel that will track your interaction, let's say, with a particular product that's on a site that you're looking at or visiting. Okay, well, that tracking information and which particular product that you're interacting with will be saved in a cookie, and then as you travel throughout your browsing history, or as you travel throughout your session on the internet, that information is going to get saved in a cookie. And then advertisers can check that information and say, because all this stuff is happening really, really fast, real time, essentially, marketing. And they can say, okay, well, this person visited this site, they checked out this particular product. Let's suggest these other products that are similar or from the same company. And all of that's kind of happening behind the scenes as you're navigating on the website and just browsing about the internet. Okay, so then we also have mobile app permissions. Okay, so think about whenever you download an application. So you go to the Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and you download an application. One of the reasons that you'll see a lot of companies, hey, we've got an app. Why don't you use our app? Well, one of the reasons they want you to do that is they can collect a lot more data about you going through that application that they have developed for their company. Okay, think about, I'll grab my phone for just a second here. Whenever you're navigating on the website, okay, they can generate certain information from you. They can even get, your general location based off of an IP, if you're not using some sort of way to, block that or obfuscate that through like a VPN or something like that. But think about what all information that you have access to within your phone, okay? You have video, you have camera, okay? You have a microphone, you have telemetry data. All of that information is accessible from your phone that that companies wouldn't have access to if you're just going through that website through the application on the website. So that's something to keep in mind. That's one of the reasons that they are wanting you to use that application. So whenever you're downloading an application, a lot of times you'll notice that it'll ask you for permissions. But one thing that we'll talk about in a moment is making sure that you're looking at those particular permissions and what an app has access to. But whenever you download that application, sometimes it'll tell you, okay, this app is going to require access to, location data or whatever it might be. But all of that is getting collected whenever you're using those apps. And then the fourth kind of broad category is going to be data brokers and secondary markets. And this is really getting into like data aggregation. So there's data brokers that are out there. Facebook and lots of other companies that are out there, they're going to collect this data and then they're going to resell it. Okay. the interested parties. And there's other parties out there called data brokers that are going to take these bits of information about you from different locations, and they're going to aggregate it, put it all together, and then see what other information they can glean from you based on all the information that they have about you. So a good example of that would be like a data broker that goes and collects information about you, credit score, background information, things of that nature, and they pull it all together in one place and then resell it to an insurance company to assess your risk for determining your insurance rates. So that's an example of kind of how data can get aggregated. And there's not a lot of regulation in that area in the U.S. right now, unfortunately. So this is, we've talked about kind of how data is collected. And I like to think about this section as, sometimes the ideas that these companies come up with are not great ideas. And so I like to think about this section as being, hey, boss, I've got a good idea. And so I'm going to go over a couple examples of kind of some things that have happened recently and how companies have gotten caught collecting data that people weren't aware of. So I bet if insurance companies, I bet they would like to know how their drivers really do drive. Okay. And so I'm sure that was probably something that came up in a boardroom at some point. And so it was discovered recently that GM, Kia, Subaru, Mitsubishi were some of the companies that were found to be collecting data from you, your driving data. Okay. Our cars have all types of sensors on them now, braking too hard, you move out of the lane, going too fast. All of that information is getting recorded in our smart vehicles now. And these companies were behind the scenes taking that data and then turning around and selling it to insurance companies. And the way they found out about it was a guy went to go get insurance, and all of a sudden his rates had jumped way up. I believe this occurred up in New York, and he couldn't figure out why. He tried several different insurance companies. They all told him, and finally one of them told him, hey, you need to look at your LexisNexis report. And that's where he discovered that GM was collecting, they had taken that data from his car, sold it to LexisNexis, which is a data broker, and then turned around and they had sold it to insurance companies. And that is what was causing his insurance rates to go up. And this was all occurring and he didn't know it. He did not realize that GM was using that data and selling it. And so since then, GM and some other companies have kind of backed off of that. So public pressure can have an impact on how these companies are actually using your data. So this is probably something else that came up in a boardroom. We could probably sell a lot more products to people if we could just hear what they were talking about. So have you ever got that weird feeling that your phone was listening to you? You're talking about something, some sort of product, and then next thing you know, you pick up your phone, and when there's an ad on there for that particular product. Well, that was actually discovered to have been occurring. There's a company called Cox Media Group that sent out a pitch deck to some of these companies and was pitching active listening technology, where they could listen in using your microphone and actively listen into your conversations so that they could turn around and sell that information in real time to advertisers so that they could sell you a product. And so after that was discovered, they kind of backed off of that. But that actually is still going on. And some of the big partners that they were pitching this to, and they were actually partners with Cox Media, or some of the big companies that you might recognize. So, Google, Facebook, Amazon, they were partners with this company until it went public, and then they kind of disassociated themselves with it. Because that doesn't sound good, right? It doesn't make you feel good that your phone is listening to you and that data is being captured in a way that you're not privy to. And so you may be thinking, okay, well, surely that can't be legal, right? Well, the current regulatory landscape is such that in the US, we don't have a comprehensive data privacy law like they do over in the EU. So they have something over in the EU called GDPR that you may have heard of. It's a very comprehensive data privacy law that regulates all sorts of types of consumer data and how it can be used by companies. Well, in the US, we don't really have that. We really have a patchwork approach to data privacy. And so when you think about that, you have certain types of data that's getting protected through regulatory requirements. And what I mean by that is, okay, you have HIPAA. Okay, that's specifically health information, protected health information that's getting protected there. Doesn't apply to all different types of data. Another thing that you're probably familiar with being in education is going to be FERPA. Okay, that protects your educational records. Okay, there's also COPA for underage children that protects that specific group of individuals and certain ways that data can be collected about them. But as far as a comprehensive approach, we don't have that at the federal level here in the US. And so what some states have started doing is they have, on their own initiative, said, you know what, we want to protect our citizens in our state. And so we're going to implement a comprehensive data privacy law in our state. And so that's really what you're seeing here in the US is you've got kind of the states taking that initiative. California was the first state to do that, and they introduced a comprehensive data law, CCDR, in that state that really covers the data privacy for their constituents. Now, 36 states in the US have data privacy laws in some form, either fully implemented or in discussion. Okay, so that's well over half. And one of the things that my research looks at is that's not going to be a sustainable approach. If every single state has their own data privacy laws, how does a company navigate that, right? That starts to get very confusing. So we really need kind of some top-down, federal bar set at the federal level. But that's kind of where we are from a regulatory area right now. And
So one of them,
Georgia does have one that is in talks. I think it's in committee currently, but it has not been enacted at this point. And so what we have instead, in lieu of the, from a regulatory approach, if it's not prohibited by law, then what courts have really kind of fallen back on and what companies have fallen back on is a consent mechanism, okay? And so that's really, when you talk about is it legal? Well, yeah, most likely, because in those terms and conditions, whenever you signed up for Facebook or whenever you downloaded that app off of the App Store, or whenever you signed up for that discount, there's a terms and condition that you have agreed to. And so that's really the approach that most companies are able to get away with a lot of these things. So I mentioned those examples earlier with the car companies. Well, that was their argument, is that, well, whenever you signed up for OnStar with GM, you actually agreed to allow us to do this. The guy didn't realize that because, he didn't, obviously we don't read a lot of the fine print in those things. You really need to have a law degree in order to really understand them. And we'll take a look at those, some of those in a moment. They are very confusing, and they're written in a way that makes it hard to understand for that very purpose. They don't really want you to know exactly what data they're collecting and how they're collecting it. Okay, And so you may be thinking, okay, well, I've signed up for lots of different accounts. What did I really agree to? Well, it could actually impact your rights by agreeing to those things. And I'll give you an example that's currently um, being litigated right now through Disney. And this, I will say, I think the last update on this is they're actually withdrawing their countersuit um, their argument in court. So there was a fella and his wife that went to the Disney resorts. Unfortunately, his wife passed away from an allergic reaction. Okay. Um, they tried to sue Disney, and Disney's response was, well, when you signed up for Disney Plus, you actually agreed to an arbitration clause in Disney Plus, and so you can't actually sue us. Well, it'll have to go to arbitration. That was Disney's, that's what they presented to the courts. And obviously the guy was like, well, this has no bearing on me going to a Disney resort. And so that has raised some legal questions. Okay, can you sue any of these companies anymore? Because most of these consent agreements have some form of arbitration clause that says that you can't sue them. If you try to sue them, it's going to go to arbitration. And Disney's argument was, well, that saves them a lot of legal fees for both parties. But that's something to keep in mind is whenever you are signing up for these services, because you may think they're free, but they're not. Okay, that's the key takeaway is that you are agreeing to give them your data in exchange for a service or in exchange for a discount with that particular company. And so by agreeing to those terms and services, you could be actually giving up some of your legal protections as well. And so what I'd like, the people online and people here to do is we're going to do a little exercise. Okay. So first thing I'd like you to do is go to, doesn't matter, which social media. I recommend one that you actually use, though, if you use social media. I'm off of just about all social media now, unless it's required for work or a job, just because I don't have much trust in how they handle my data personally. And that's something that you kind of have to, that kind of decision is something you have to make on your own. But I would encourage you, I will give you some time, go and look up the privacy policy for a social media product that you use. If you don't use social media, then just think of a service that you use, and most services online will have a privacy policy out there. And so take a few minutes to go and look that up, and just take a look through their privacy policy. I'll give everybody a few minutes to kind of do that. One of the things you may find while you're doing this is it might be hard for you to find that privacy policy. So that is by design as well.
Or it just goes on and on and on and on and on.
Exactly. One of the things that some of the current data privacy laws state is that as you're reading through this thing, some of them have gotten better. I will say that. They're written a little bit more plainly, but generally they are very long. And who is going to read through this thing to understand every way that because these are written by lawyers and these are smart people, okay? And so they have to tell you generally how they're going to use their data. But a lot of times that verbiage that's used in there is couched in such a way that it sounds very positive. Well, if some of the data that's collected about you may be used to help improve services and provide you with a better experience. What does that translate to? That's something that's pretty common in just about any consent or privacy policy that's out there. What that's telling you is they're going to collect data on you and then they're going to resell it. to people, or they're going to take that data and use it to develop products. Is another thing that they might use it for. So that is definitely one of the areas, and you can actually take that privacy policy and you can run it through. There's some readability checkers out there. WebFX is one that you can run it through, I believe, that will give you a readability score. And in many cases, these privacy policies are written at a high college level or post-grad level, okay? So you need to be a JD, a Juris Doctorate, a lawyer, in order to really understand these things. And that's where companies have really been criticized. And some of these data privacy laws have told these companies, okay, you've got to write these privacy policies in more plain English so that a common person can understand it, especially people that are of an age that's going to be using the product, okay? So let's think about just a social media app. What age are their target users, okay? If the target users are, high school and college, we'll just say in general, and it's written at a postdoctoral level, how can that person give informed consent in order to give away their data? Because that's essentially what they're asking them to do. And that's one of the things that not just the consent mechanism in general, but privacy experts, have really criticized that, using this consent mechanism that we currently have set up in the U.S. and really around the world, people can't really give informed consent based on the way that these policies are written. And so another, I don't want to get too far, as I said, I tend to get long-winded on this because it's something I'm passionate about. But another thing that you can do is if you go to download an app from the App Store, whether that's Apple or Google, when you go to download an app from there, if you scroll down in there, it should tell you the things that the app is going to request permissions for, or is going to require permissions for. So some of it's optional, okay? So if you're downloading a gaming app or something like that, it may ask you for your contacts list, okay? Why would it need that information? That's something you need to ask yourself as you're downloading. Don't just blindly click, okay, yeah, sure, you can use it for whatever, okay? Because that's something like, why would this application need this particular permission? So ask yourself that question as you're, from now on, as you're downloading your applications. All right, so now let's get to the point, because I want to make sure I had time for this part, is what can we do in order to kind of protect ourselves, okay? And I've got a picture up here. This is managing those consent preferences. Not all products are going to, we'll kind of go over this a little bit more, but not all products are going to be created equal, okay? There are products that are out there that do a much better job just inherently of protecting your data, okay? And protecting your privacy. So browsers, Firefox and Brave, those are two browsers that are really well known for being privacy and security focused. Chrome, I put a little bit of an asterisk here. I will say that Google, in my opinion, has kind of mixed reviews. I will say that in general, they have tried to do what I think is the right thing. Now, have they had some bad ideas? Yes, they have definitely had some bad ideas when it comes to protecting people's privacy. But in general, they have, I think, been a good faith actor. So that's why I kind of have an asterisk there. Chrome does a pretty good job of this, and I'll talk about it a little bit more when we talk about browser extensions and other products that you can use to kind of help protect your privacy. DuckDuckGo, search engine, very good at helping to protect your privacy by not storing a lot of that data that like Google does and monetizing it in a way that you might not expect. So some of it's going to need to take some initiative on your part, okay? You can't just blindly go through, clicking accept everything. You really need to kind of think through some of these decisions. So managing your cookies and consent, and that's what this is right here. And so going into your browser and evaluating those privacy and security settings and making sure that they are compatible with the type of data that you want to be protecting. And so the browsers that are out there, they generally will have a section that talks about privacy and security, and you can set different kind of thresholds. So whether you want it, strictly enforced, moderately enforced, or I don't really care, you can take any data you want to about me kind of approach. And as you travel to these sites, there's, do not track signals that you can implement within your browser. And so that's when a lot of times that you'll see these type of consents that'll pop up. And this is also kind of also due to some of those data privacy laws that says that you have to notify people of what data that you're going to be collecting and give them the option to opt out of it. And so this is one of the common ones that you'll see kind of pop up. Strictly necessary cookies. Sometimes there are cookies that are required for the site's functionality, and those are always going to be active. But there's other types of cookies that you can disable. And so I just about always will go in there and disable anything that's not strictly necessary. Okay. And if we look at it, you can expand each of these and it'll give you a little bit more detail about what they're really collecting here and what the cookies are being used for. So do a little bit of digging on your own. I will say that if you disable all of them, sometimes there are certain features on a website that might not work if you disable all of them except for the strictly necessary ones. So that's something to kind of keep. And another approach that you want to, just like with cybersecurity, your privacy, you want to kind of take a layered approach, okay? So in addition to doing these things, selecting good products that are going to be good stewards of your data, taking some initiative and making sure that you're doing what you can to protect your data privacy within the settings of those products. You can also layer on additional protection by using things like using private mode. Okay, any browser is going to have some sort of incognito or private mode that is going to enhance your privacy by restricting the data that is going to be collected about you. That doesn't make you invisible on the internet, but it will kind of help protect you by not allowing anonymizing you to an extent as far as what a third party can gain about you. VPNs are another way that you can do that. You can kind of obscure your location data, and that's also good, especially for from a cybersecurity perspective, creating a method to kind of protect that data in very sensitive information. So you might not want to use all of these approaches for every single instance, but if you're going to be dealing with certain sensitive information, banking, healthcare information, things that you really want to kind of keep really private and secure, you want to think about adding additional layers there. If you're just going to be browsing the internet, I mean, maybe you don't need to have your VPN on all the time. But if you're going to be doing some banking, yeah, you better have your VPN on. That's what I would recommend. And so I put Privacy Badger and uBlock Origin. Those are good extensions that you can add into your browser. They are good at Privacy Badger is one that you can use to kind of notify companies and kind of restrict the data they can collect about you. uBlock Origin is another one. I put an asterisk there, and that kind of goes back to what I was talking about with Chrome. So Chrome, uBlock Origin, based on the kind of how it was built and the information that it kind of blocks, is not valid anymore with the current versions of Chrome. So you can't, there's a way that you can still use it, but it's a bit of a workaround in order to get it work in Chrome. But it still works fine in Firefox. That's kind of why I have that asterisk there. And so Chrome gets partial marks. I will say that they did try and implement a way to kind of get rid of cookies a while back. They were trying to push that forward. It hasn't gone through yet, but they actually got a lot of pushback from advertisers because they like the cookies. They like to be able to gather that data. So I will give them a good mark for trying to implement that system. So what are some other things that you can do? Good cybersecurity practices, those help for protecting your privacy as well. Okay. Password managers. Okay. If you're not using password manager, you should be. Okay. There's one password that you need to remember, and then the password manager will be able to create infinitely complex passwords using upper, lowercase numbers, special characters, and it will store them all in your password manager so that all of your passwords are unique and they're very complex. You want long, complex passwords if you're using passwords, okay? And that has to do with the entropy, and there's mathematics behind that. You can look up if you're really interested and want to geek out on how exponentially harder it is to crack a password based on the length and adding additional things like upper and lower case and special characters. Passkeys are better than passwords. Passwords are better than pins. And I put a little asterisk there. So if you're thinking about like pins, 4 to 5 digit pins, yeah, not great. Okay. You want something, they have some pins, they will allow you to have, longer length, and it's essentially a password. It can be, numbers and characters. But passkeys use encryption technology, public-private keys, and they work really seamlessly. If you've never used one, it will allow you to basically sign into a site automatically. Yep. And they are fantastic. You don't have to remember a password or anything like that. It almost, people have not really adopted them, and one of the problems is it kind of works invisibly, and so people don't think they're as safe as passwords, but they are. They're actually much safer than that. Two-factor, multi-factor authentication, something you have and something you know. That's kind of where the multi-factor authentication is. You always want to have that implemented, especially on very critical accounts. Email security is critical. That is in our password-based cybersecurity space right now. Your email password and your email account is really one single point of failure, because what does just about every single account that you have, what is the one thing that it offers you? Okay, you forgot your password? Hey, let me send it to your email and we will reset it for you. So if you do not have a good password and a secure password on your email account, it doesn't matter how long and complicated that password is for your password manager or for any of your other accounts. If somebody can crack your email, then they can reset that password and they can take over your account. And then one thing that I think really anybody should be doing right now, everybody should have your credit frozen with all of the major credit agencies out there. Social security numbers are not secure. There have been so many data breaches that have released social security numbers along with other identifying information about people. It's all out there on the dark web. Just assume, you should operate from the assumption that your data is out there somewhere and that somebody could impersonate you. So the best way to protect yourself in that regard, to keep people from opening up accounts in your name, is to freeze those accounts. And then if you need to apply for, a loan or mortgage or something like that, you go there, you unfreeze it for that specific company for an X amount of time, and then you go back and refreeze it once they've run through it. It's a little bit of a hassle, but it's a good way to kind of keep yourself safe in that regard. And also, you can get some extra help. So there's other services out there. Data deletion. So Delete Me is an example of a company that will go out there to these data brokers and request that they delete all the information about you. It's a service, you have to pay for it, but it is worth it in some cases. there's a case study on kind of whenever there was a big data breach a while back with a data broker, national data, can't remember the national public data, I think, something like that, where the data broker was breaching. People that actually had service like this, they weren't in the breach because they had a company that was going out there and requesting that all of these legitimate data brokers that they delete that information about you, and so they can't aggregate it. Now, as soon as they delete it, these companies will just start creating a new file on you. So that's what paying a subscription is for a company like that, is they will go back each month and say, hey, you've got some more data on them, delete it. We don't want you to have it. And then dark web and credit monitoring, LifeLock is an example of a service that will kind of monitor those for you as well. And finally, contact your state and your federal representatives. Okay, that still matters. Putting pressure on your representatives to implement a data privacy law that will better protect you, there's still value in that as well. So with that, I will open it up to any questions anyone might have, either here or online.
Just also put into chat asking to see if there's any questions online. While we wait for a group of your faculty to pretend that they were paying attention. Is there anything that people might think that you've seen that where people think it's a good idea? They're like, I'm doing this and I'm protecting myself, but it really isn't.
Let's see what would be a good example of that. Well, I will say, kind of going back to my, example of, your email security. I mean, that's one thing. I mean, people might be using a password manager. They might be using very complex passwords. They're not repeating their passwords, but then, they're not taking good care or having a very strong password on their email. Not being, judicious about where they're giving that information out to. So, an example of that will be a lot of companies use, a federated login. So you have a centralized company like Google, or here we have single sign-on. Microsoft is essentially authenticating your ID to somebody else. And that's really what's at the heart of, why do we use passwords anyway? Why do we have passkeys? Because it's a digital environment. It's not like when you go up to somebody in person, you can say, hey, I need you to prove who you are. Okay, well, I can pull out my driver's license or my passport. We can verify who you are in a physical sense, but in a digital sense, it's very complicated when you think about it to do that. When you go to apply for, an account with somewhere, you want to, open up a credit account, which you can do online now. How do they verify that you are the person that you say that you are? And that's the way that we do that is, you provide them with some information, then you create an account so that whenever you go back, that they're verifying through that that password and login, that you are who you say you are. So that's really kind of at the heart of kind of why we have the system that we do. But that's something I think that really we need to be thinking about in more depth. But to kind of get back to your question, if you don't maintain that email and making sure that it is secure and protected, if you're letting Google just sign in to every account that's out there, because Google is one of the big companies, and there's other ones, Facebook does it as well. But if every place that you go on the internet, you're allowing them to use that login to verify who you are. One thing I don't think that people think about, Google, I think if they've got the money, they can kind of protect your information there. But what about the company that you're signing in with that Google account? How good is their security? Okay. And so that's when you kind of get into supply chain issues where, or third parties, where another company, you have to not only worry about how good is Google security, but how good is this rinky-dink company that you don't really know a lot about? How good is their security? How well are they going to be able to protect that information about yourself? So that's something that, people need to think about as well.
We have no questions online, but I did have one of the students who was participating. Thank you for a